How's it going, guys? Welcome to another JS Bootcamp. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kiro. I'm a web developer here at LinkedIn, and I'm happy to see all of you here, which is fantastic. Good. So today, today's bootcamp was supposed to be about jQuery versus YUI. And then I spoke to Jim, who's sitting right here. Why are we even going to talk about YUI when all of LinkedIn is actually pushing towards jQuery, jQuery being the new kid on the block? Actually, that's relative. It's about 3.5 years old, or 4 years old about. And then I said, let's just scrap YUI and let's just concentrate on jQuery. Now, who here is familiar with jQuery? Okay, so we have a few hands there. Okay, who here has heard of jQuery? Okay, who here knows what jQuery does? I hope everybody puts their hands up. Okay, shame on all. I'm just kidding. Okay, that's good. It's good. So let me pop this up for you guys. So I get my awesome picture right there. Now, as I said, today we're going to learn about jQuery. We're not going to learn how to code in jQuery because I actually think that it's a pretty relatively simple language or library to get used to. And I wanted to make this as interesting as I possibly could. So I'm not going to go over syntax. I'm like, this is how you do this is how you do that. I'm going to show you like the really cool things that jQuery does. I know there's a lot of people here that actually have like extensive experience with jQuery, but not so many people actually use jQuery for the coolness that it brings to web development. And I think I'm one of those people that advocates the simplicity of jQuery and its awesomeness in web development. Okay, so today what we're going to cover, we're going to talk about jQuery, what it is. We're going to go over some simple selectors and just like we're going to scratch the surface of what jQuery does because I don't want to bore you with the gory details. We're going to talk about some of the cool things it does with respect to traversal, iteration, array, and object literal traversal, that is. Event handling, how it does it, why it does it, how it does it, and why it's good the way it does it. From there, we're going to talk about custom events, so that should go under event handling. And then from there, we're going to talk about something else that is pretty unique to it's a pattern, but pretty unique in that jQuery was one of the first to actually implement it within the library itself. And the pattern is called the deferred promise pattern. Some of the people in my team will probably be familiar with it because they'll always hear me bickering about it. Okay, so what is jQuery? Who here can tell me what jQuery is? Sachin.
It's a JavaScript framework.
Aha, he said JavaScript framework. Okay, so is jQuery really a JavaScript framework? Is it, guys?
Depends how you define framework.
Okay, so how would you define framework? Walter?
That's a library.
All right, so if he defines framework as a library, a little bit of circular reference there. So I would define a framework as a set of given, a library that gives you a structure to define a set architecture, including object-oriented programming and all the awesome design patterns that you get with an architecture. I would actually classify jQuery not as a framework, but as a library, although people do use it as a framework. But the point of jQuery is that it simplifies JavaScript development as far as DOM traversal is concerned, but not so much as objects construction is concerned. We're going to take a look at examples about that. The whole point of jQuery is that it's easier to write jQuery than just pure JavaScript. Look at what I have up on the board, up on the screen. Can you guys see that? You can, right? What is this doing? Yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just doing a document get element by tag name. So basically, it grabs all the elements by the tag name being div. So it grabs all the divs in the document, and then iterates over the length of the divs, right? And then it sets each one to display none. So basically, it just hides them. Pretty straightforward, right, guys? The same thing can be written in jQuery just like that. It's like pretty short, and you can imagine why people are so excited about jQuery. This is butt easy. Now I don't even need to know iterators at all. I can just slap the div tag name inside of jQuery wrapper and tell it hide. Easy, right? So this is jQuery's philosophy. Basically, there's 2 points to it, and I've simplify it as much as possible. You just find some HTML and do something to it. And that is the essence of jQuery. That is the whole point of why it was created. John Resick, the inventor of jQuery, he came up with a library before, and he said, and he posted on his blog, hey guys, would it be really cool if instead of doing all this iteration to just loop through a list of elements and hide them, for example, I can just give a selector and perform an action on it. So he came up, and then it evolved into what jQuery is now today. Again, it comes up to this is my opinion, and it's shared by a lot of people in this industry, that jQuery itself is not a framework, it is a library. But it can still be used as a framework. And it ends up being that a lot of people overuse or bastardize jQuery to end up using it as a framework. Now, some of the things that jQuery does, and it does well, is the idea of selectors. Can somebody tell me what selectors are as far as jQuery is concerned? Colin.
It's basically a way to pull out elements from the DOM.
Exactly. He said it's basically a way to pull out elements from the DOM. That's exactly what selectors are. 3 ways to pull out elements from the DOM, 3 ways to select. The first one is always by the element ID. The second one, this one, is by the element's class name. And the third one is by the element by tag name. So the first one just pull out one element by ID. The second one, all the elements whose class name equal to my class. And the third one, all elements whose tag name equal to table. The interesting thing about jQuery is that actually it does not return to you one element as a straight up DOM, but it returns to you an array of jQuery wrapped object. In that table, now this selector, for example, will return to you an array of all elements whose tag is a table. And each one of those elements is actually a jQuery wrapped object. And what do I mean by jQuery wrapped object? Is that this creates a jQuery wrapped object, meaning an object, a document, element wrapped as a jQuery object. So in other words, it denormalizes, it augments the object and adds and gives you certain actions and keywords and operations that you can perform on. In the previous example, for example, divs returns to a jQuery wrapped object in which you can perform operations on. In this case, it's hide. So of course, I wanted actually to note that jQuery, when it does all this, it optimizes them all. How do you do it in native JavaScript when you want to get a certain element by ID? I kind of said the exact way you say it, the exact way you do it. How would you retrieve an element by ID without using jQuery? Sorry, Anna? So he says document get element by ID. Awesome. Actually, that can't even be optimized in any way, just by sheer nature of it being sitting on the as a native host operation. You can just grab the it's just not optimizable. But things like class names and tag name, all these are actually optimized by jQuery. So that is one of the reasons of jQuery's existence. For example, things like class name or things like get elements by tag name, all these that are JavaScript that I can actually do in JavaScript, all these are optimized by jQuery. For example, some browsers like the VA engine, they support query selector all. Are you guys familiar with query selector or document.query selector all or document.query selector? No? Okay, so basically it does a depth first pre-order traversal of the whole DOM, and while it might not be the fastest thing as far as searching is concerned, it is the way to do it for the DOM. But not all browsers support that. But jQuery shields you from it. It's black box. You don't have to worry about it. Just give me the selector, and I will take care of providing you the result. So some of the examples, again, the first one, get element with ID content. He also does pseudo selectors. Everybody know what a pseudo selector is? Somebody, pseudo selector. Okay, pseudo selector is basically, well, actually, as an example, this one right over here, in which is gonna grab all the LIs, and from there just takes the first one. Or things like get all links whose target is blank, get odd number table rows, get all divs whose ID starts with foo. It does an actual regular expression matching inside of your selectors. Not all libraries do that. jQuery shines in it. It's good, it's fast, it's optimized, it's cached. So that's really good. Who here knows how CSS usually works as far as selectors is concerned? If I have a CS file and I have something like if I have a CS file and I do this, div, give me a class name, blah. Okay, what does this do, guys? It's pretty straightforward, right? No? Yeah, I know it's straightforward. What is this doing? Come on, somebody, give me, all right, Anand. So you're saying it finds all the div, and then from every div it finds all the ancestors that have a class of blah, and then it's going to set their color to white, correct? Is that what you said? I'm assuming that's what you said. Okay, that's semi-correct, except that technically it works the other way. Is that CSS selection works from right to left. So, yeah, yes. It's the unfortunate outcome of a depth-first pre-ordered traversal in that it goes all the way to the ancestors, all the descendants, and then from there it goes up to the ancestor. So it does, all right, go all the way down, okay, find me blah. Then from there, go to the parents and see if it is div. It is, okay, I've met my search criteria, and then the style is applied. So while that may not be the most performant as far as most people are concerned, like who cares? We're not going to argue about that. That is just how things work. So jQuery actually tends to optimize CSS selectors for you. In that if you say something like div.blah in jQuery and then hide, what you will actually attempt to do is different. You will actually, so in CSS selection, as we said, it will go from blah and then go all the way up to the parent. And then if it's met, the result is applied. jQuery does something different, depending, of course, on which engine you're running on. It would actually do a document get. It will first do a document get element by tag name div, and then from there it will actually look for all the descendants that have the class name blah. So it will actually try to optimize it for you, because doing a get element by tag name on div is notoriously much faster than just doing a straight up selector and a multi-string query selector on this too. Yes. Thank you. So Sacha made a good point. What is the difference between these two? You guys see this often in CSS code, right? So the first one is this, and I will actually code it for you. Yeah, I just saved it. Now, is the difference evident, guys? See the little space in between there? All it's saying is that for all the divs, and then they have some sort of elements inside, are not a descendant of that div that have a class name of blah. In this case, here's my div, here's my span, here's a class name of blah, the selector is matched. The third one is a div whose class name, no space in between the dot, a div whose class name is blah. Or divs whose class name is blah. In this case, this is matched. Does that make it more obvious, guys? Okay, cool. No deer in the headlights.
The first case also match against the second code example, or is it only?
No. This will only match against this example, or please don't ever code like that, but or this. So any descendants of that, so the first one, any descendants of the div whose class name is blah is going to have it. So any descendant, not direct descendant, right? So the difference between, like, in this case, blah is a direct descendant of div. This is, yeah. In this case, this span is a direct descendant of div, but this guy is not a direct descendant of div. It's just a descendant of div. But if you wanted to do direct descendant, you can do this. So then in that case, only this will be matched. Besides the point. Now, so I want to talk about something that is really interesting and about jQuery, and then it's iteration in it. Has anybody used the $each or a jQuery wrapped object .each before? Has anybody seen it? Colin, you've seen it. People, right? Of course. The Captain Morgan has used it, of course, web developer. All this is doing is just a iteration on every single item in the array. jQuery gives you like a nice alias for it, in that it gives you this $each, and then the array that you want to iterate over, and then a function that you want to perform or apply on every single item within that array. So $each, and then loop over the array, and then for every single item in there, just print it out, and this was going to be the output. Now, the interesting thing about jQuery is that, who here was in for the scoping and the closure and all those? I see some familiar heads. Now, why is this interesting in the way it does it? It's applying a function to every single item, meaning that every single variable inside a function is actually scoped to that function. Why is that good? By the way, if you guys have any questions, just pop up, interrupt. Now, why is that good, guys? Say I now have things like Can anybody tell me what's going to happen? Come on. Who here was paying attention in scoping? Come on. Come on. What's the value of x going to be? Sorry? All right. So Roman said it's going to be 1. Is this correct? Yes, it's correct. Now, all my variables inside of the function, I scope to it. And that is fantastic news. An additional thing that jQuery does inside of the iterators is that you actually do not, if you don't have any arguments specified, remember the this binding, the value of the this keyword inside of the function actually points to your item. In this case, this is going to be A, and then B, and then A, and then B, and then C. That is actually pretty good as far as performance is concerned, because whenever you pass in arguments to an object, if there are arguments and they're used within the arguments to a function, and if you use those arguments within the function, then depending on the JavaScript engine that you're running, it will not be optimized, because it's saying, hey, here's an argument, I'm going to create an argument object inside of this activation record for the function. But the fact that I did not need to pass in arguments to the function and instead use the current context of this binding within it makes sure that things like the V8 engine, which drives Chrome Node.js, for example, can actually optimize your code for you as far as performance is concerned. You guys get that? If I don't, please feel free to interrupt. So what I'm trying to say is that if I have things like item and index, what the JavaScript engine is actually going to do is going to create a nice arguments object for you. It's going to say item is equal to something. It's going to say index is equal to something, because it sees that inside here, I'm actually using them, right? So that's an additional object that JavaScript is creating for you, that the JavaScript engine is creating for you. But the fact that I didn't have to do this Sorry, actually, it does multiple things. This and plus the this binding is equal to some sort of value, right? But the fact that I didn't have to pass in the arguments to it means that this didn't have to be created. Performance boost. Does it really matter? Probably negligibly so. But if you have a couple of thousand of this iteration on your page, if you have that many, you have something, there's something wrong. But of course, performance will definitely improve. Now, iterators, or the $ each, is actually good because not only does it allow you to traverse through arrays, but also through object literals. In this case, an object literal is just as defined as object literal is just a key value pair collection, as every single object in JavaScript is. So I can actually iterate over every item in the array, just like that. And the same property applies, except the first item is the key, the second one is the value.
Does it have a no parameter equivalent?
Yes, it does. So the value of this is going to be equal to the is going to be equal to your key. So in this case, I mean, this is pretty straightforward, guys. This does essentially the same thing as the equivalent in JavaScript would be that's the equivalent in JavaScript, native JavaScript. Another good thing that jQuery has for you is a $map, or the map function. What it does, it performs a certain operation on an array. It performs, yes. Sorry, can you speak loud? Oh, you're next to the mic. Use the mic.
Back to the each, if you want to return out of the function, you cannot in the each. You need to use with, right?
So in the, it's actually a good point. So he's saying this. So of course, in a normal length, how do you usually break out of a? I just told you, but anyway, you just do break, in native JavaScript. But how would you do it if you're doing the $each, right? There's no such thing as break, right? Break means nothing inside of a function, absolutely nothing, right? It's only valuable inside of a for loop or a while loop as such. The actually way to do it in jQuery is that every single function that is applied on an item when you're looping is an actual return value is given to you. It's a Boolean return value, whether it's true or false. By default, it's true. If it's true, the iteration continues to the next item. If it's false, the loop is the next. It just breaks out of the iteration. So in this case, you can actually do return false, and that breaks out of the loop. Good question. Everybody gets it?
So what's the difference between the each and the with? The main difference?
Each and?
The with. Dot with.
With?
Yeah.
I'm not even familiar with that. Does that even exist?
In YUI it does.
Oh, this does not. Sure. This is not jQuery method. So unfortunately, I am not super familiar with YUI. But if you do have those questions, Jim over here is a YUI aficionado who will definitely answer it for you. Now, another thing aside for traversal is the $map. I'm going to skim over this and get to the good stuff later, guys. So forgive me and bear with me. Who here has used the $map function before? No? Nobody? Okay. So the $map basically allows you to iterate over something and then perform an operation just like each on every single item within that array or object literal and return to you what the value you want for a new array construction needs to be. So in this example, I have an array, A, B, and C. I want to say for every single item in the array, perform some sort of action, perform something, and return to me a value. The value is returned and then appended to a newly created array. In this case, I'm saying, well, for each one of this, map this array to a new array. For each action, for each item in the array, make the item uppercase, return it. So this creates you a nice array with all the items uppercase. Kevin?
Is there a reason you passed an index? Is that necessary for something?
There's absolutely unnecessary. Yeah. So I just showed you just so you know, just so you can see that you can have the index inside the array. Again, JavaScript objects can be overloaded, but they're overloaded flatly, meaning that you don't have the same function multiple times because the last one, the one that you've declared last is going to win. The way you would do method overloading in JavaScript is just by having as many arguments as you possibly need. If you guys don't get that, I will show you. Right? If I have this, and I have this, and I do this, which one is going to compute? Which one is going to compute? No, the second one is going to compute. I've redefined something. So how would you do method over, how would you actually then say, well, you know, depending on what my arguments are for something, I want to do an operation on them. Well, you just use method overloading because every single variable that you, if you've not specified an argument when you've invoked the function, the value is just undefined, and undefined is a legitimate value. Is a legitimate value as far as JavaScript is concerned. So you can even do console.log A and B, and it's just gonna say, it's just gonna say undefined, undefined. Or, yes, they are. Good point. I know you know that. So the variable, as such and said, they're always mapped by the current position in the arguments list, in the arguments right there. So they're not by name at all. Okay, now some of the good stuff about event handling. Who here was, I think it was,
Kiro, can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
Did you say that it's actually changing the array or
No.
return array?
Yeah, it's returning a complete new array. The array, the original array is not modified. Oh, I'm sorry. In this case, though, the original array is modified because I said it. Okay. Okay. So R2 is equal to R1 is still equal to, do you see that? So my slide actually replaced the current array because they're, oh, okay, well, it's the same variable name, so it actually is replacing. But technically, map is creating a new array, then setting the original array in here equal to the new array. Okay, some of the good stuff about jQuery, something called event handling. Who was here for Peter's browser? Yeah, Jim was here. You know, what is it? The DOM is the bomb, right? That's what it was, right? The DOM is the bomb. Document object model equal browser object model, something like that. It's good stuff. I hope most of you went because it'll definitely help you understand the following. Is that jQuery gives you the ability to bind events on pretty much anything. For example, and it does that by giving you the operation or the function dot on, and then that's a function. So for example, and there's two ways. One is called direct event handling or direct event binding, and the other one is called delegation event binding. And the difference between the two is actually pretty obvious, but we'll go on with direct. In this case, what is this doing? I'm gonna pull people out. What is this doing? Come on, this thing right here. All right.
I'll take a guess.
Yes.
It's looking for
Yeah, perfect.
Click events on it.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'll say the other way just because it makes more sense in people's minds, right? As opposed to working as a tree, doing it from ancestor to parent. I'll do it the other way, even though in reality we really know what it's doing.
In JQuery, it is going the other way though.
I'm sorry?
In JQuery, isn't it going the
From right to left?
left to right?
So yes, it optimizes it for you. Like it will do a document.getElement by ID. From there, it will actually iterate over to find the children. And then it also depends on what it has, what engine you're running on. Whether you have query selector or a query selector, it depends on what engine you're running on. So I want to sort of abstract away from what it's doing and just see what the end result is in this case. So I find the data table, an element whose ID is equal to data table. In it, there is a T-body, find that, and then in it, there is a TR. In it, there are TRs, find those. For every single one of them, bind the click event. So on click, perform a certain action. Events are really interesting. They're interesting beasts inside of the JavaScript world in that they give you a lot more information, actually just like any other language, but they give you a lot of information regarding the elements that you've clicked on or the action that you performed. For example, if I click somewhere on a page, I want to know, well, what was my original target? What were my mouse coordinates when I click? On what was the original element? What is my current target? Where in the DOM do I sit? What action do I need to perform? Do I need to propagate my event? Do I need to stop propagation? Do I need to do all that? So jQuery actually gives you the raw event that JavaScript would otherwise have given you, but it patches it for you. It augments it. It gives you a normalized event object. From there, you can still access the original event, the original event object, of course, by doing event dot. I don't remember. Event dot original target, I think. Now. So the difference between direct binding and delegation binding is that direct actually direct actually binds your function or your event onto that DOM that you specified. So directly inside of the DOM. So in this case, on every single TR, so on every single table row, I will have a click handler bound onto it. Delegation works different. Delegation works in that I specify what to bind my click handler on, but it will be triggered off of it will be triggered. Okay, that's actually a crappy way of explaining it. So I don't know if you guys remember how event handling works in the browser. How does it work? There are two ways. Nobody knows? Yes. So he said events capturing and bubbling. Is that what you said? Okay, good. What is the difference between the two? Come on, who paid attention to Pete? Come on. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Actually, I'm gonna simplify it for you. I have a parent and I have a child. In event bubbling, if I click on the child, excuse me, if I click on the child. For example, if I bind a click event and it's on the child, it's going to say, okay, child click, it's going to bubble up or propagate upwards to the parent, and the parent is going to click handler. If there is a click handler bound to the parent, it's going to trigger as well. So it goes from child to parent. That's bubbling for you. The other way is events capturing. Capturing works the opposite way, is that it propagates downwards from parent to child. So if I click on the child, it's going to say, okay, parent click, go down, okay, child click. Good. And if there is handlers on the way, oh, there's a handler on the parent, trigger that. There's a handler on the child, trigger that. That's capturing. And bubbling goes the other way around. So every browser supports events bubbling. Not all browsers support events capturing. Now, what jQuery does, by default, jQuery only does event bubbling. They do not do event capturing. There are some events that just don't bubble by default, such as focus, input changed, I think. To be honest, I'm not an expert in that, so I'm not particularly sure. But still, jQuery patches them up so they do bubble. And that is really good because now that implementation is you're completely shielded from that implementation, so you do not have to worry about that. Anyway, that said, with event delegation, you can bind a handler on a parent instead. And then when you click on a child element, it's gonna, when it bubbles up all the way to the parent, at every single stage is gonna check, do I have an event that I'm supposed to fire that matches this selection? It's like, yes, I do, fire it. Now, for example, now in this case, I bound an event to every single span inside of this div, okay?
You bind an event or?
Sorry, I bound a handler, so that, I'm sorry, the event is click. I bound a handler to every single element inside of this span, okay? This is the handler itself, this function, okay? So how many handlers do I have bound? Yes, I have 5 handlers bound. With delegation, it works different now. In that now, I only have 1 handler bound. And all it means is that when I click on a span, when I click on this span or so and so, the event is going to propagate upwards, and at each stage of propagation, it's going to say, do I have a click handler bound onto my current clicked element, for example? In this case, span. It's going to say span. Okay, do I have a click handler on that? No, I do not. All right, go up to the parent. All right, do I have a click handler on that whose selector matches what the original target was? Span? Yes, I do. All right, fire that event. So how many handlers do I have in this case? 1. You can imagine the performance gains that you get on that when you have like a table with I don't know, 1,000 table rows, and imagine on every single one of them you have a click handler. That's a lot of handlers. And then garbage collection on, as far as JavaScript is concerned, is not the greatest thing. It's not cheesecake. I love cheesecake. It's not really great. So if you have this many handlers on the page and then you do something to it, of course jQuery optimizes it, but imagine it didn't. So imagine you have all these handlers on the page and then you did something and completely depleted or destroyed all your objects. Now you have on the page all these functions. All these functions are in memory that you're not using anymore. So eventually, the JavaScript garbage collection is going to take over and say, all right, do I have anything that is referencing this function? Maybe I do, but I don't. But maybe I do, maybe I don't. So if they don't, then they're set up for garbage collection, right? And that is actually great as far as JavaScript is concerned, because the only way you release memory is by, well, aside from letting the GC take over, you actually have to break reference, either by setting objects to null or by setting them to undefined. As soon as you set an object to undefined, GC can take over. Because once you set to null, once you set to undefined, it means that you have broken reference. But if you have that many objects in the page and you're not doing with it, JavaScript, because it's not the most optimal thing in the world, it might actually not break reference to it. When you have one handler instead sitting on the page that controls the action on 1,000 items, that's pretty easy for GC to take over and deal with. So you can imagine the performance gains on that. So Case in point, if you have that many items sitting on the page, don't bind the same handler to each individual item. Bind it to the parent.
So one of the trade-offs you mentioned was the performance improvement of the second when you have additional elements.
Yes.
But also, isn't it true that if you have this and you dynamically add a new span, only the second one will actually...
Perfect. Great point. That's why I love have Sachin here. Great point. So what did Sachin say, guys? For event handling, for event binding to actually work, for direct binding to actually work, the element that you're binding the handler to has to exist in the DOM. That means at the time of binding the DOM, at the time of binding that DOM, that element has to exist in your DOM. If it doesn't exist, then you're not getting an error. It's just going to be an empty event handler that you're binding on. It's just going to be a handler that you're binding on an empty set if you're using JQuery. With delegate binding, because you're binding to the parent, you can still insert and inject HTML or insert new DOM as children of the parent, and they will actually participate in the event handling. Got that, guys? Cool. Any questions so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is the this reference the same in both of these?
So, nice. Okay. Now, this binding inside, the value of this, which is, I call it this binding because that's what it is. So the this binding inside of your handler is actually equal to your document element. So it's not equal, so this is not equal to, it's not actually this. Sorry, so if I click on a span, for example, let me do it here. So if I click on a span in here, this is actually going to be equal to your span. So if you actually wanted to perform more actions on this, on your span, like hide it, for example, you would actually have to do something like this. If you're not caching and you're coding badly, you actually have to do this. You have to wrap it inside as a jQuery object. Is that cool, guys?
Or is that second one still span?
Yeah, so that's going to be your original target. One of the things that people don't often use, but it's a great thing to use, is that jQuery gives you the ability to pass data to the handler, like custom data. In this example, I have a button. I'm binding a click event to it, and I'm saying, okay, every single time you're clicking, just Carl. I think I took this example from the jQuery site. So every single time I click on the button, I'm going to pass this event data to it, and I can access it just by doing event.data and then the key of my data. This is really good. This example is kind of crappy in that, okay, well, here I really have a hard-coded, but you can imagine if instead they're parameterized list of arguments of event data that you need to pass in, then it's really good because now you have access to it. Assuming, one second, guys. Assuming you follow proper OOP practices and then your handlers is outside of your your event binding is actually outside of your handler. So this sits somewhere outside of your code. This sits somewhere inside of somewhere else, and this sits somewhere else. Then, I can say, oh, well, send to this function, this custom data, and then I have access to it right over here. There was a question here somewhere. No? Okay. Now, the interesting thing about jQuery, it gives you the ability to create custom events. So remember how I said the word on to bind events? There is something, you can also force the trigger of events using the trigger function. What it means is that even if I have custom events, I can, for example, in this case, I get all my p tags and I create my own custom event called, P, whenever my custom event gets triggered, do this. And in this case, for example, I say, okay, bind the click event onto the button, and then I say, well, for all the paragraphs, trigger my custom event. So then this one here is going to trigger. Now, actually, sorry guys, I forgot to do one thing that is important, and I will show it to you. All right. That is pretty important for you to understand it. Who here understood? I said something before about propagation. Does anybody understand what that means, or what that? Remember with event bubbling, events propagate up to the parent. Okay, so there is a way. Imagine you have like a bunch of handlers on children, and on the parent you have even more handlers. And when I click on a child element, I want to say, do not perform subsequent actions. Like, I don't want the event to bubble up to the parent. If I click here, I want the event to stop. Because, I don't know, something happened, I want the event to stop at this location. I don't want it to propagate upwards to the parent. You have the ability to do this in native JavaScript, and jQuery glorifies it for you. The way to do it, you have a bunch of methods, called event of stop propagation, event of prevent default, and event of stop immediate propagation. If somebody here has done a little amount of scripting, they've often seen people creating a click handler, adding a click handler to a link to an anchor tag, and they wanted to do something via JavaScript, and then they say event of prevent default. You guys know what that does? So event of prevent default just prevents the default action from occurring, right? In the case of a link, if I click on it, what's the default action? Yes, what? Exactly, yes, exactly. By W3C standard, as soon as you click on a link, the default action is for you to actually go to that link. Event of prevent default, all it does is says stop default action from occurring. So now you can use like an anchor tag and have like a nice href set in there, and then add a click handler in there that says, if I click on it, do something else, but if that something else does not happen, well, I don't want you to go to the next page. Then do an event of prevent default. So basically, imagine I have some sort of href, does some, I don't know, it goes somewhere. I can do just event of prevent default. That is actually going to stop the event from propagating upwards, and the default action is not going to perform. Then I can do my own stuff in here, like console.log, so and so. JavaScript gives you a short form notation as well, in that in every single handler, it expects a Boolean value back. And if that value is true, then the event is going to be, the event is just going to continue. If the value is false, the event is going to prevent the default action from occurring, as well as the propagation is not going to occur. So essentially, I can replace this by doing this. And that has the exact same behavior. Now, why that's interesting, I have a nice test page set up in here. Okay. Now, you guys can all see that, right? I just have a parent div inside. I have a child div. Then, oh, I'm not gonna get into this, guys. Not today. But basically, just look at this code right over here. I'm adding a click handler onto the parent, and I say whenever you click on the parent, whenever you click on the parent, just print parent click. Then whenever I click on the child, child click one, then I have two handlers that are set on the child. I have this handler and this handler. They're both on the child, but they're two separate handlers completely. Cool? Now, what would happen if I click here, right? Well, remember that events bubble by default, or only bubble in jQuery, right? So the first events get triggered by sequence, meaning in the order in which you've bound them. In this case, I have my child. I bound this handler to this child over here. This is going to be the first handler that actually triggers. Then this is going to be the second handler that triggers. And then the events are going to propagate upwards to the parent, and then this event is going to trigger. So that's why you see, child, click one, child, click two, then the parent click. So how would I stop if I click on the child, how would I stop it from triggering this guy? Sorry? Return false or event to prevent default, right? So what happened there, guys? What happened there? Why didn't it work? Anybody has an idea why that didn't work? So it said prevent the default, right? And what does that mean? What is the default action? Nothing. So what do I need to do? Good. Cool. Now, the thing is, remember that they get executed in the order in which they were created. So how would I stop the second child from executing? I want to say, well, the second handler bound onto the child from executing. How can I stop it? In other words, I just want this to trigger. I don't want it to go up to the parent, and I don't want this to execute. Well, the way to do it is you can say event to stop immediate propagation. Cool?
Do you need both to?
Oh, well, I mean, if you do stop propagation, the parent is not going to trigger. I was wrong. So you can do stop immediate propagation to actually stop the event from bubbling up to the parent and stop any sibling handlers from propagating, from being triggered. Yes, Kevin.
Is there a way to stop siblings but keep it bubbling?
Trump me every time.
Couldn't you trigger on the parent?
Yeah, you can force the parent to trigger. You can technically do this, but that's hideous.
Yeah.
Okay, no trumping allowed today, guys. You get the same event. Kevin, I hate you. Just kidding. Love you, son. All right. All right, we'll move on. Any other questions about that, guys? All right.
Dollar signs significant in that example?
I'm sorry?
The dollar signs in the parent and child, are they significant, or are they just?
Oh, okay, cool. So that's just a standard. It just so a developer knows that these were our jQuery wrapped object and not just some free-floating variables. It literally means nothing. I could have easily just called them this. Yes, jQuery. Not jQuery. Yes, Victor. I called you jQuery.
What would the equivalent be for return equals false? Or return false? Like what would that be the equivalent?
Cool. Okay, so back to where we were. So we kind of like touch on trigger. I want to skip that because I want to get on to the good stuff. And people that on my team that have probably have seen an extensive use and abuse of it. Is somebody familiar with the deferred promise pattern? No? Okay, good. Now, remember that JavaScript is all about like, JavaScript is a single-threaded language, but they still give you the ability for asynchronous operations if they're being performed as like requests on the server, for example, or if you're doing things like our fake asynchronous events like timers. In JavaScript, timers, there's no such thing as multi-threading, right? Timers are, it's still run on one thread. You just say, do I have an available execution time slot? Yes, I do. Okay, trigger this timer. Okay, now stop it. Trigger something else. Okay, go back to the timer, trigger the next. Okay, go back, and so and so. It's still like single-threaded. But let's just pretend that timers are asynchronous for the purpose of this example. Now, JavaScript is all about, whenever you see like an asynchronous operation in JavaScript, that means that I'm going to perform an action. When that action completes, I want you to do something else. How are they done in JavaScript? You've probably seen this, right? You have some sort of operation that is asynchronous. One of the parameters passed in is the function that you want to, a callback function that you want to execute when that asynchronous operation executes. You guys are familiar with this pattern, right? You've seen this 1,000 times, right? Please say yes. Okay. So, I mean, this is okay. This is all good. The problem happens when I have things like this. The trouble happens when I have things like this, right? All right, callback, and then what happens if in here I'm logging the result. I'm just printing it out on the console. Now what happens if I want to perform another operation? How would I do it? What happens if I want to say, okay, now, print out on the screen the result plus 10? How would I do it? Anand? Okay, well, a couple of ways, right? You can, pretty simple, right? Just result plus 10, right? Correct? All right, what happens if I want to separate the two because they have nothing to do with each other? Maybe like a function. Console.log result. Function add 10. So the log result plus 10. And then in here, what would I do? I would actually have to do, print result add 10. So add 10 result. So I've like decoupled the print and the add 10 from the delay function, but now the delay callback. But the callback now actually has print and add 10 inside of a callback itself. It's kind of ugly, and this is a problem, right? Especially when you want to have independent operations. So operations that have nothing to do with each other, you essentially couple them inside of a callback function. That is ugly. On top of that, imagine if I have a callback, and this callback does another asynchronous operation, right? Maybe it does something else, right? And then this callback and then this thing does another asynchronous operation. You just have you end up having a nesting of all these callbacks, because JavaScript really allows you to do that because it actually shines in doing that. So this is a problem. So a solution came up, and it's called something called deferred and objects. If people are on my team, again, like we've extensively used them because they really solve our architecture or our asynchronous structure. They really solve it for us. So there's something called deferred and promises. What deferred and promises are is that on any asynchronous operation, you can create this wrapper object that gives you the promise that a value is going to be given to you. That means that if I have an asynchronous operation, I can decide, okay, I want you to create for me a new deferred object. When that asynchronous operation completes, I want you to resolve that promise. But whether that promise is satisfied or not, I don't care. Just return to me the promise immediately, and then I choose what to do with the value that is returned to me. In this case, I have something like my delay function, this is the exact same example as that, except it's a deferred and promised if I for you. In this case, I have my delay function right over here. I'm creating a new deferred object that jQuery actually created for you. Now, the deferred promise pattern is not a pattern exclusive to jQuery. It exists outside. But jQuery is probably, I think, the only library that has a self-contained and solved it fairly well for you. And that's one of the reasons why I love jQuery, because every single asynchronous operations within jQuery actually routes through this pattern. Operations like animation, any animation like fade in, fade out, disappear, basically any animation that we're not going to deal with today. So basically all I need to do is create a deferred object, and here's my synchronous operation. I want to say create a new deferred object, and an asynchronous operation happens. But immediately I want to return to whoever invoked the delay. I want you to return it the promise that this deferred is going to complete. Now, meaning that I can now call my delay like this. I can say delay, and then delay returns to you this promise object. This promise object has a bunch of operations that you can do on it. One of them is the done. So I'm going to say delay. When that delay function is done, I want you to execute this. So what happens in here? It comes in here and it says, okay, I create a new deferred object. Here's my synchronous operation. After 1 second, my deferred object is going to resolve, and I'm going to give it a value of 10. That means that in here, in my handler, I can add this function that is going to be executed once the delay is done. And remember, because I resolved with 10, I have access to the 10 right over here. So that actually beautifies the code for you, because I can have things like I can decouple all my handlers essentially like that. So in the case before, I can have delay.done, some completely independent operation, and then maybe something else, completely independent operation, maybe another completely independent operation. And a done essentially gets executed when you have resolved a promise. Right over here. One of the things with promises is that, well, aside from resolving it, in other words, the asynchronous operation succeeded, is equal to success. Another thing that you can do is reject promises, which is analogous to saying the asynchronous operation failed. So I say, in my example, in here, I have a delay operation. It's the exact same thing. I have my asynchronous operation. I just fake it with a timeout. And I choose a random number between 1 and 10. I'm going to say if the result is less than 5, resolve the deferred object. That means the asynchronous operation succeeded. If it's greater than 5, then reject it. On both instances, pass in the result. So how do we check resolves? Remember, for resolves, we check them with done, right? But for reject, we actually check them with fail. So now I can say, okay, call delay. If it succeeded, that means it's done, success, and then the result. If it's rejected, that means it failed, then compute this. Yes, Colin?
Is done blocking, or is it another?
So are they executing in parallel? Are they executing in parallel?
Well, as far as
No. So
does it block?
yeah.
Block if done.
No. So the first done. So what happens is that the first done is going to compute. Once that computes, the second one is going to happen. Once that's done, the second one is going to happen. But you can still tell, and that's getting into the little nits and cracks of certain syntax inside of deferred objects that I don't want to get into. But you can actually stop the next events from firing.
But done will not return until the promise is fulfilled.
So done, the function inside done will not execute until the deferred object is resolved. So this handler is not going to execute, and it's not going to execute until this thing fires.
Done will return after reject is set.
No, done is going to return right away because it's part of the promise object, right? So done is going to return right away because it's inside of the promise object. But the function inside of done is going to execute once I either resolve or reject. Sorry, or once I only resolve. The function inside fail is going to execute once I reject. The thing is, you can.
You can chain fail on your next slide after done. I guess that's what I was wondering about.
So it doesn't matter, right? So I could have done it the other way technically.
Pretty much it's like registering.
Yeah, essentially, exactly. Perfect way to say. I'm just registering what the handlers are going to be with respect to the operation that is going to happen, or the event, the result of what's going to happen. But you can never guarantee, though, like for done or fails that are going to be executed in the order that they're going to be done, right? So there are ways to ensure like sequential execution. So instead of done, I can say, well, when you're done, do this, and then do this, right? I can say, when you're done, do this, and then, do something else, and then maybe do something else. That's how you can ensure that they run sequentially. But for done, you're not guaranteed that they're going to run in the order that you've attached them. Because JQuery gives you the ability to chain everything. So
Or stylistically, do you use fail for if you just don't get back values you like, or do you use it to?
yeah, this was my own crappy example. So a fail, you should technically, you can use for whatever really thing you want. If you're going to use them for like requests that are based on server-side logic, so they're real asynchronous operations, then typically use a fail if you're, for anything really, 400 or 404 or 500 or anything, yes?
I was wondering if the thens attached to dones, or if they're.
The thens are attached to
So if I have like a done, a then, and then another done, would it go like? Could it possibly execute?
no, you have to do the done first in that case. Then are off of the done.
Okay, yeah, but like there's another done below it. Would it execute that the then before that done?
So you're saying if you have done, then done.
Yeah.
Good question. I have no idea. I don't do it purely because it looks ugly. I know that you cannot guarantee the order of execution if dones are sparsed. So if I were to take a guess, you probably will not get your desired behavior. Don't quote me on that, even though I'm recorded. Any other questions?
Can then be attached to fail?
Oh, trumps. That's a good question. Good question. I'm not sure because it makes, yes? John, did you want to say something? No? All right. So I thought maybe you knew the answer. So I'm not sure because fail, by sheer virtue of its definition, should only execute when something fails. So if something has been rejected. So once something has been rejected, they should only go into fail. Yes. The only function that will execute after a fail or a done is another operation called always. Some sort of other function. So always is going to execute regardless. So if you have done, if your asynchronous operation succeeded, and you resolve it, it's going to go to done, and it's going to pass, right? And then afterwards, it's going to trigger as always. Or if you fail, it's going to trigger your fail first, and then go into always. Think of it as your finally clause in a try catch. Yes. Somebody else? No? Okay. So one of the things with JQuery that you have with the deferred promise pattern is the ability to actually it gives you the ability to actually be able to execute functions when a series of asynchronous operations are occurring. For example, I want to say, well, I want you to call this asynchronous operation. I also want you to call this one. I want you to call this one, and this one. When they're all done, I want you to perform this action. Right? So JQuery gives you a nice $ when, in which you pass in these asynchronous operations that all return to you at the promise Okay, so the key is they all have to return to you a promise. When all of those promises are resolved, that means when all of them actually are resolved, so they're all successful, then you want to execute a function. If any of them actually fail, then done is not going to execute. It's going to go fail. So typically, how would you do it in JavaScript if you were not using a deferred promises object? You have a bunch of asynchronous operations. You keep the length of all your operations that you're going to count. You have a callback. And then on your callback, you say, well, OK, this call completed. You know, do like the count -1. You know, if count is 0, do something, right? You would have that in every single callback, right? So the $when kind of abstracted from you in that it does it all for you. And this is actually really, really great. And it's funny enough, we use it for in the connected team with LinkedIn contacts. We actually use it for synchronization when we're syncing when we're syncing your contacts. We actually pull from different endpoints, and we say, okay, when we're done, when we're done pulling in from all these asynchronous operations, I want you to do one final thing. And I mean, this is a pretty short piece of cake, sweet code, right? And really easy to understand syntactically, right? You know, when this, and this, do that. Doesn't get any easier than that. JavaScript beautified for you.
When you call each of those delays, are they one after each other or all together?
So I mean, it's going to. So this one is going to execute. This one is going to execute. This one is going to execute. But the thing is, the way it's implemented, it does like a. It looks like your arguments object, right? And it does for each item in your arguments object, execute do your arguments, right? In this case, it so happens that I have delay as a function. Delay as a function. Delay as a function. So actually, before this happens, this is going to execute right away, right? Just by sheer nature of the parameter being a function itself, right? Any other questions about that, guys? We're actually, I think we're pretty much done. I didn't want to go over like last time by half hour. I got. Yes.
So each one of those delays is a new call returning a promise.
Yes.
But you could also pass it in an unexecuted function that we call, and that's expected to return.
No. It has to be a promise. It has to be a promise. I'm sorry. If I said that, I definitely was wrong. No, it has to be a promise, what you're putting in. This has to be a promise because they have to have a promise because they have to have an either resolved value or a rejected value. They have to have that.
So when will not execute something
So if you don't pass in a promise object as parameters, then what's going to happen is that it's waiting for one operation to occur, but it's never going to fail or reject. It's going to wait hopelessly in there. Yes.
So what would be the pattern to follow if you wanted to actually chain callbacks?
So the question was, what would be the pattern if you actually wanted to chain callbacks together?
Like have one execute, then after that's done, do something else, then after that's done,
Yep.
do something else.
This.
Oh, I thought that was all done. Like after.
Oh, so you want to have it sequentially? Ah, okay.
Yeah, but is it possible to like, should I say this? Oh wait. Let's see. Mic. Okay, I think I do.
Do you want to use the mic if you have more questions? I'm sorry. Yeah, feel free.
No, I was just wondering, like, is it possible to have a case where you would have, like, in the then, you would have some type of asynchronous call, and then, because it seems like this pattern is just a way of wrapping things and organizing things.
Yes.
So
It essentially does the exact same thing as callbacks does. It's just as callbacks within your arguments array is concerned, but it shields you from it, so you don't have to worry about it.
Right.
Sugar.
So I'm wondering, like, let's say the first then executes, and then you want the second then to execute.
Yes.
But only when, like, what happens in the first then, let's say there's like an async call.
Complicated one.
Yeah,
So you sure you want to get into that? So he's saying, what happens if an asynchronous operations happens here? Oh man, this is ugly. Are you ready for this? Ugly. Can't believe you wanted this. Async. Some async operation. Return 50. some async operation, maybe DFT dot resolve. Oh, this is so hideous. Pipe. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Sure, 1 second. What's going to happen in here is that delay is going to happen. This is going to trigger. Then some asynchronous operation is going to happen. I'm going to pipe the result of that operation. So this I know that it's going to return a promise. So then I'm going to pipe it. And this is going to execute once this asynchronous operation completes. Hideous, absolutely hideous. But if you need to, that's what you would do. Yes?
Couldn't we just have a similar like async structure inside the function? I mean, wouldn't that just be nicer?
Sure, except, yes, totally agree. The only thing is that, I don't know, indentation level is kept pretty flat. On top of that, see, it happens that in this case, the callbacks are not, the handlers are anonymous functions within my then and all that. But imagine if they were outside, right? You know, hello, right? And then maybe somewhere I can do hello.done, right? And then do something, right? Then in here, I'm going to say hello, right? So if doing it your way, that means I have to put my code in here. So I've tightly coupled it to one single operation, and I can't reuse it anymore. But doing it like that ensures that it's completely decoupled, right? Do you understand that? So look at this piece of code. So look at this piece of code. I say hello, and it returns to me the promise. That means I can do this right now. Okay? That's it. So now it's decoupled, completely independent. I haven't tied it to any other function. Whereas if I actually did it your way, what if I actually did it your way? Like, for example, imagine this was print. You were suggesting this. Right? So I kind of like I've coupled those two functions together. Right? Whereas if I don't do it like this, then I can just do this. Ugh, ugly. Well, you get the point. Cool? All right, guys, we're going to go over time, and I refuse to go over time this time. So if there are no more other questions, thank you for your time.